Hi, everybody. My name is Clint Marquardt. I'm a sleep and fatigue specialist working out of Ottawa, Canada. And I'm going to have a great conversation with my friend and colleague. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle Robertson Rath, also known as Green Eyed Guide. I'm working out of Wisconsin, and my business is helping people who work long hours and unusual hours manage their caffeine and fatigue.
Great. Excellent. So we met a little while ago, I guess maybe about 6, 8 months or so ago. And our backgrounds seem to mesh really nicely. But why don't you tell the story of how we met? Because I think it's kind of neat in the year 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been posting content about caffeine and managing fatigue, and I posted an infographic, I think, on managing fatigue or not getting enough sleep. And I believe I got a comment or a like from from you or from your profile. And I thought to myself, ooh, fatigue specialist, who is this? So I went to your profile and you had so much helpful information on your Instagram page, even more helpful information on your website itself. And I thought this would be a perfect partnership because you have so much experience and so much background in managing fatigue, and I have a lot of experience in how to survive when you are sleep deprived with caffeine and other things. So I thought between our two levels of expertise, it would be a perfect synergy. So that's
And
when I
I,
introduced myself.
I was pretty excited too when I first saw you because as you mentioned, most of my work is in the sleep and fatigue side of things, and I talk about caffeine a lot. So I probably don't know nearly as much as you do. You're the caffeine expert. I'm more on the sleep and fatigue side of things. But one of the strategies I talk about a lot is how to use caffeine properly to manage fatigue. And I think you're probably going to clarify a lot for me, but also for other people, maybe our listeners or our watchers as well. So,
Yes.
yeah, pretty excited to have met you, and I think we've done a couple of projects together already. And here's our recent one. Good conversation. So, when we started talking about what do we want to talk about, what type of conversation could we have, what do our followers and listeners and viewers, what might they be interested in? We thought that having a little discussion around talking about night work and how to prepare for it and how to deal with it might be kind of interesting. I've worked a lot of nights, so my background is in sleep disorders medicine. So I've worked in sleep labs for many, many, many years, and pulled all nighters in school, night shifts at the sleep lab, all of these things. And you said you've done some night work too, right?
Absolutely. In fact, that's kind of how I got interested in studying the science behind caffeine and energy drinks. Energy drinks really came along right when I was starting college, and I was managing full time studies with not one, but two part time jobs. So I was pulling a lot of all nighters too. And that was a trend that carried through my undergrad years, my graduate school, and also after college when I was working in the day trying to publish my book and then also working in a bar at night. So not only was I studying caffeine, I was also relying on it heavily because I wasn't sleeping, when normal people sleep. I was sleeping like a vampire, and that poses its own unique challenges.
Yeah, it's hard. Would you ever go back to working nights?
No, no,
Yeah,
no. I mean, it's
no.
funny because I am kind of working nights now just because I have a toddler and a newborn.
Oh
So
yeah,
I'm awake, in the middle of the night,
yeah. You've
working.
got
But
another
it's
you've got another 18 years of night shifts to go through. Yeah,
exactly, yes,
yeah,
yes. So I'm not getting
yeah.
paid to work nights anymore.
No. I have to do a night shift every now and then when I'm trying to reach clients that are only available at night. So I do trainings or interviews or what have you at nights, and I'm reminded of why I don't work them anymore. It's rough. So we both got some good experience about how hard it can be. I'm sure you've made lots of mistakes in managing fatigue, sleep, and caffeine around the night shifts. Can I tell you just a really quick story of my first introduction to caffeine? And I'm sure you're probably gonna, you're gonna just shake your head with all of your knowledge around caffeine. So I remember in undergrad, and I don't know why I took this course. I thought I'd be good at it, but it ended up being a really boring course. I took business algebra. I was good at algebra in high school, so I thought in undergrad, a bird course, I take it, get through it without any studying. But um, university algebra is a little different than high school. It's a lot more difficult. So I didn't prepare through the whole semester, and then at the end of the term, I had to cram for this final exam. And at that point, I'd only really had, maybe a cup of tea in the morning, and that was about it. My younger brother had already immersed himself in caffeine, and back then there were no energy drinks. Actually, I think there was one called Jolt. You probably have heard of.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's still around, but it wasn't billed as an energy drink. Anyway, I
Right.
had never even had a Jolt, and my brother said, "Well, just have a cup of coffee before you study at night, and you'll probably be good for a couple of hours." So I thought, well, if one is good, four is probably better.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so within about an hour, I had about 4 cups of coffee, and then I sat down to try and read. And I was so wired, I couldn't even read a paragraph. So what did I do? I said, well, I'm not going to get any studying done. I might as well go to bed and try and get some sleep. And of
How'd
course,
that
that
go?
didn't work either. Yeah. So I hope you're going to, in our discussion, tell us how not to do that, and do it
Yes.
a bit more strategically, shall we say?
Yes, exactly. One of the questions I get a lot when I tell people I study caffeine and energy drinks is they ask me why. Like, everyone loves coffee. Everyone knows how to drink coffee. But my point is that there's a way to drink coffee strategically. And like you mentioned, it's all about the timing and the dosage. And so those are the details that I'll happily share with you in a moment here.
Excellent. And I'm glad we're using the term strategy here, and not some other word like a reliance, or something like that. And it aligns with my way of thinking around managing fatigue. And I tend to divide strategies up into two uses or two categories. And one is fatigue prevention. So preventing fatigue before it hits. So you got to predict when you're going to become fatigued, and then how to potentially prevent it or reduce the future fatigue. And then I use the term countermeasure to describe the use of strategies to fight fatigue you might already be experiencing, even though you might not feel super fatigued. Right? So you've got to understand what makes you fatigued, assume you're likely fatigued, or if you already feel fatigued, and then look at what strategy can I use to fight it. And caffeine, I think, is a really great one for that. So
I think
prevention
that's
versus countermeasure. Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I think that's perfect because I think you need both. I think there's a lot of value in focusing on the prevention and doing what you can to prevent yourself from being fatigued, whether it's lifestyle changes or work changes or diet changes, etc., which I know you'll go into. But then, if that doesn't work, or if that doesn't work well enough, how do you have those countermeasures so that it's basically both sides of the coin? I think they're both equally important.
Yeah, I do too. So how about I tell you about one strategy, a sleep strategy, that I'd recommend people use to prepare for a night shift. Uh, and I'll focus on prevention of fatigue first, and then maybe you could
Okay.
tell us how you might squeeze caffeine into that prevention overall set of strategies too.
Okay,
Okay,
perfect.
so research shows that people who sleep during the day usually sleep less than people who sleep at night. And this happens after night shifts or before your first night shift as well. So most of us need between 7 and 8 hours of sleep per night. And research shows that typically a night shift worker will get 5 to 6 hours of sleep per night. So they're shortchanging themselves anywhere from an hour to 2 hours of sleep per night, or per 24-hour period.
Right.
And part of
And
that
then you're
has,
not sleeping at night.
that's right, yeah. So shortchanging per 24 hours of life is how I like to think of it, right? Because they're sleeping during the day. So when people are preparing for nights, what I like to see them doing is trying to reserve some of the fatigue, some of that sleep pressure for just before the night shift. Now, it kind of fits well with the normal sleep pattern of night shift workers, which is typically you're so bagged after a night shift, you come home, you can't do anything, so you get a bit of sleep. And then your biological rhythms, your circadian rhythms tend to wake you up around noon. It's time to eat, right? So they have a bite to eat. They try and get through the day, but typically they become fatigued again middle to late afternoon. So what I say is, sure, get a little bit of sleep first thing in the morning to relieve that pressure and make yourself feel okay. But don't try and sleep the whole day. If you need to, set an alarm to wake yourself up for lunch, or if you wake up naturally, just get up at lunch. Have a regular lunch. So you want to try, and one of the best ways to reduce the long term effects of sort of flip flopping back and forth between days and nights is to keep your brain and body on a daytime orientation. So teach your brain and body that day is day and night is still night.
Okay.
So one of the ways of doing that is have lunch at lunch. Right? So your
Okay.
brain and body are expecting some food at lunch, so you give it some food and you eat a typical lunch. Don't eat breakfast at lunch. Eat a lunch. So grab a bite to eat, and then wait for your circadian rhythms to kick in again and bring your alertness level down. So we have a post lunch dip, it's called, where your core body temperature drops a little bit. And at that time, it's really easy to fall asleep again. So I tell the shift workers, wait till you feel that dip. Typically starts maybe around 1:30, but for some people can start as late as 3:30. Then get as much sleep as you possibly can right up to the night shift, right up to when you start, and then start your night shift. So where would you put caffeine in there? How would you use the caffeine side of things? And this is a fatigue prevention strategy because you're placing as much sleep as possible just before that night shift. So you're
Can
preventing
I
fatigue.
ask?
Yeah,
You had used a term before, which I'm familiar with, but maybe some of our viewers aren't as familiar, and that's sleep pressure. Can you describe that term a little more?
yeah, good idea. So sleep pressure. There's when you don't get enough sleep, your body and brain try to essentially correct itself. And the formal term is homeostatic drive. So homeostatic drive for sleep. So your body always tries to stay in balance with the right amount of sleep and right amount of wakefulness. When you don't get enough sleep, your body wants to drive you into sleep. So pressure, there's a pressure to sleep. Yeah. So good. Thanks for getting us to clarify that. Yeah, important.
Oh, no problem. And that fits perfectly with what I was about to say as well, which is when you have a lot of caffeine over a short amount of time, the adenosine, the molecule in your brain that normally makes you sleepy, has nowhere to go. It doesn't disappear, but caffeine is sitting in its spot in your brain, basically. And so that creates another type of pressure where once the caffeine starts alleviating, once it starts getting metabolized, all of that adenosine creates that pressure that makes you sleepy. And so, what I would recommend in parallel with your advice is for people to have their caffeine as close to the night shift as possible. So if they are waking up for lunch at 12 p.m. to maintain that normal schedule where day is day and night is night, I would strongly discourage people from having caffeine at that time. They might wake up groggy because they've only had 3 or 4 hours of sleep as opposed to the 8. But having that caffeine at lunch, especially if you plan to sleep again before your night shift, having any caffeine will make it harder to get that sleep and to alleviate that sleep pressure before your actual shift.
So although it might feel good to have a coffee at lunch, it's probably not the best strategy, right?
Exactly. Don't do
And
it.
yeah, so and you and I have talked a little bit about your concept of I think you referred to it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Being more alert with less caffeine or something like that. Right?
Yes.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Absolutely. So this goes into using caffeine strategically. So there are 5 different ways that I like to emphasize. It's the 5 S of caffeine, which we can get into. Which we can get into in more detail. But essentially, the core of my strategy to help people feel more energized, even though they're getting less sleep, is to use that caffeine strategically, which means not having caffeine when you don't need it. In other words, if you're bored or dehydrated, caffeine is not a good solution for you. You can also make sure that you're not consuming more caffeine than you need, because you'll get too used to it. You'll build a tolerance. And so, really, having more energy with less caffeine is all about using these 5 different tricks, these 5 different 5S of caffeine, to make sure that every ounce of caffeine is doing as much work for you so that you can do more with less.
So when I'm teaching fatigue management strategies, what I tend to talk about is sort of one pleasure dose of caffeine if you need it or really love it, but reserving the rest for strategic use. Does that fit with your idea?
Absolutely. And my I guess you would say my strategy with caffeine is mostly around those countermeasures that you mentioned before, whereas you could probably speak to a lot of the prevention that will also help people get more energy with less caffeine. So there's really the two sides of it. There's plenty of things that you can do that help you feel more energized, um, whether it's sleep tips. I'd probably ask you to go through those a little bit more in detail because you're more familiar with them. But you have to pay attention to both. If you want to feel more energized with less caffeine, you have to pay attention to those fatigue prevention steps as well as some of the countermeasure steps like the 5S of caffeine.
Yes.
So I guess my question for you is, what would you recommend for people that are having night shift in addition to having lunch, what kinds of things should they be taking in terms of other supplements, not caffeine, but other supplements or lighting or things like that? What other kind of prevention things that people can
So
do?
yeah, so there's not a lot of great research around supplements that will help your sleep tremendously. There's a lot of talk about melatonin. Melatonin is a naturally occurring hormone in your brain that essentially signals to your brain that it's time to sleep.
Okay.
The problem with melatonin, and I think it's the same in Canada and the United States, is that it's still considered a food product, not
Oh,
a medication. So the consistencies of concentrations in melatonin that you buy is is inconsistent sometimes. Sometimes you think you're buying melatonin because that's what it says on the container, but it's part melatonin, part something else, maybe some ginseng or something else in there. So it's hard to know um, whether or not melatonin supplementation is really helpful. Now, in the studies that have verified the concentrations of melatonin, what they have shown is that in some people, yeah, they can help um, increase the likelihood you'll fall asleep. In some people, it doesn't have much of an effect. Problem is long-term effects. We don't know what that does to us. Right? If you're taking melatonin during the day when your brain thinks it should be awake, is that good or is it bad? We don't really know. I think in the short term, if you find that supplementing with melatonin is helpful, then sure, it's probably okay. But if you're thinking of a 10, 15, 20-year shift working career, it's probably not a good idea to rely on it. But every now and then, it's probably okay. Now, the
so
interesting
would you
thing with
recommend?
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
no,
I
go
was going
ahead.
to ask if you would recommend melatonin for someone that is just starting night shift, whether it's their, first year doing night shift, or maybe it's their first day of a 7 stretch, night shift.
Yeah.
What are your recommendations around that?
So I think it's a good question. For people who've never done night shifts before, I would say try and do as much naturally as you possibly can, which
Okay.
means really focus on getting the appropriate quality and quantity of sleep. So not just your 8 hours for every 24 hours of life, but 8 hours of good quality sleep. Then, if that doesn't work, then we start talking about, well, how can we use caffeine before the night shift? So, as you mentioned, nothing during the day, but have a dose before your night shift. And if you start feeling fatigued during a night shift, maybe one more dose, and that's it. If those two strategies don't work, and then we can talk a little bit about napping on the job too, if we have time today. because again, that's a natural strategy. If they don't work, then you can start gravitating towards, let's try some melatonin and see if it works. Melatonin is linked to light. So we know that there's a narrow spectrum of light in the blue range that suppresses melatonin. And if you think back to melatonin's purpose, which is to signal to the brain that it's time to sleep, it means when your eyes are exposed to blue light, and blue light is in full spectrum light as well. So if there's sunlight, full spectrum incandescent light or fluorescent light, what have you. If you're exposed to it, the blue light is actually suppressing melatonin in your brain. So it's stopping the melatonin, which signals to your brain that it's time to be awake. And that's a good thing. It helps keep us in train to being oriented to being alert and alive and awake during the day and asleep at night. If you're trying to get a little bit of sleep during the day by using melatonin, then the strategy I always recommend is take it as close to the end of the night shift as possible. And that is because the end of the night shift, your brain is still thinking it's nighttime. So there's already melatonin in your brain. So it kind of matches that normal pattern anyway. If that doesn't help, then be really careful with taking melatonin during the day, during your second sleep period, or if you're trying to sleep through the whole day. And the reason I say be careful is because sometimes it can be unpredictable as to how long it stays in your system. And if you consume it too late and for some reason you don't metabolize it quickly enough, and then you have to drive to work, you could be overly fatigued on your drive to work. The other recommendation, and then the other recommendation I always say with melatonin is sometimes you can buy melatonin that says XR, SR, extended release, sustained release on the containers. Never ever ever buy and use that. The idea behind it is they try and keep it in your system longer to keep you asleep longer, but the effects, again, are so unpredictable that you don't know when it's going to dissipate, when you're going to metabolize it and be alert again.
I see.
Yeah.
So that really emphasizes the value and some of the other prevention measures that you talked about, like getting good quality sleep. You talked a little bit about lighting, I think, with the blue light. That explains why we have that blue light filter on our phone, right? So that if you're staring at your cell phone before bedtime, it shouldn't, sometimes it does, but it shouldn't interfere with your ability to sleep, right?
That's right. Yeah.
What other fatigue prevention measures would you recommend before we start talking about countermeasures and the 5S of caffeine? What other fatigue prevention tips do you have for people working night shift?
So all of my tips are all centered around getting the right quality and quantity of sleep. So that's really, really important. So for a quality perspective, one of the best things you could do is pay a lot of attention to your sleep environment. So if you think about a normal nighttime sleep environment, what happens at night when the sun goes down? It gets a little cooler. So cooler is really important. The sun has gone down, so dark is really important as well. So cool, dark, slightly more humidity. When there's a bit more humidity in the room, we tend to breathe a little bit better. So slightly higher humidity, is really good. Have you heard of the sleep disorder called sleep apnea?
That's where you don't breathe normally, maybe?
That's right. That's right. So sleep apnea, one of the treatments for it is to wear a device called continuous positive airway pressure. So the idea is there's an obstruction in the upper airway. If you blow a steady stream of air, pressurized air into the upper airway, the airway never closes up. It stays open the whole time. But what makes it much more comfortable, the using CPAP, is humidified air, because it's like a natural lubricant. So slightly, and that applies to all of us, not just people with apnea, but to all of us. Slightly higher humidity in the bedroom or sleeping chamber is really important. So we've got cold, dark, very very quiet, and slightly more humid. So if those are your goals, then you can think about, well, how can I fabricate a perfect sleep environment? So what can you do for sound? Earplugs, great. Uh, Earplugs, and the best ones are not the the foam orange safety plugs that you see. Don't use those because they can become uncomfortable. Those ones, the foam expands in your ear canal and it can create pressure that's uncomfortable. The best
I
type,
see.
yeah, the best type is they're made of out of a wax-like silicone substance that you fill the, it's called the extra-auricular space, the area outside the ear canal with like a putty.
Okay.
A really great brand name, if people are looking for a great brand, is called Max earplugs, MACK apostrophe S. So fabricate a quiet environment with earplugs. Um, Blackout shades or drapes are really good. If you don't have those, then a simple eye mask can really be helpful. Sometimes people use soothing sounds from like a noise generator or a sound generator. And if you go to YouTube, there's lots of sound loops you can play over and over again. Caution there, though, don't choose a thunderstorm. Sometimes the crackles of thunder can be unpredictable and they end up waking you up. Cooler, sometimes opening a window can be helpful. A few a little less bedding. Now you got to be careful with cooling the whole body down. What is really preferred is to keep the blood in the brain a little bit cooler. So body's a little warmer, brain a little cooler, and that helps with sleep as well. So those are just some environmental tips that I think are pretty helpful to get a better quality of sleep.
That's great. And those are all cost effective too. If you're working night shift, you don't need to spend thousands of dollars on fancy equipment. You can do all of those things you just described. That's
Yeah,
great.
you just have to. You have like you're right. You just have to get a bit creative and figure out how to fabricate this ideal sleep environment. Yeah. So why don't we move to talking about countermeasures? So we
Yes.
can picture our shift worker listeners. They've tried their best to get enough sleep and good quality sleep. They might have had one dose of caffeine before the night shift. And how much would you recommend for one dose? What's a dose in your mind?
So, a healthy adult should not have more than 400 milligrams of caffeine per day, and that breaks down to 200 milligrams of caffeine per serving. So, scientific consensus between multiple countries, US, Canada, European Union, is all saying that you should not have more than 200 milligrams of caffeine per time, which works out to about 2 cups of coffee. And in fact, the first of the 5 S's of caffeine, is to sip your caffeine because you may not need all of those 200 milligrams. It's surprising how well caffeine works when you have just a few sips. There's lots of evidence that the placebo effect with caffeine is very strong. So, my first recommendation, the first S of the 5 S's of caffeine, is to give caffeine a few moments after you've had those first few glorious sips of your coffee and let caffeine kick in. Caffeine often feels like a reward. So, aside from letting those first few sips get to work, we expect caffeine to make us feel alert. And that expectation creates that placebo effect. And it creates a release of dopamine because we're treating our coffee like a reward. So, you've got the dopamine that's making you feel alert, and also the expectation that caffeine is going to wake you up, actually making you feel alert. And then you have caffeine itself. So, caffeine, the placebo effect, and dopamine, all three of those can make you feel alert just with 2 to 3 sips of your coffee.
Wow. So I knew I would learn something from you today. I didn't really know that there was a placebo effect for caffeine and that it was that strong.
Oh, it's
That's
so
pretty interesting.
strong. Did you know that a group of college students were split into two, and the room that they were taking their exam in was pumped full of coffee aroma, and the other group, the room was removed of any odors. So the group taking an exam in a room that just smelled like coffee, no actual caffeine, but just because the room smelled like coffee, that group performed better on their exam because just the smell of coffee creates this placebo effect in our brain where we feel like we're more alert even if we haven't had any caffeine in our body.
that kind of makes sense. There's the psychological behavioral pairing bit, right? We've had coffee so many times and it's helped us feel alert. So simply smelling it is going to trigger that same alertness. That's pretty neat. Now I want to
Absolutely.
just go back to one of the things you said. So 400 milligrams. Try
Yep.
not to exceed that ever in a 24-hour period. You don't need more than that. And you mentioned that one dose can be up to 200 milligrams, but that doesn't mean it has to be 200 milligrams, right?
Correct. There's so many different, I won't call them energy drinks because there are some caffeinated beverages that aren't quite coffee, they're not quite tea, they're not quite juice. They're really just a caffeinated beverage. There's so many of them out there these days in all variations of ingredients and natural ingredients, artificial ingredients, and caffeine amounts. So, what I'd recommend, in fact, one of the other five S's, which is switch, is to switch up your caffeine source. I would save the caffeinated beverages that have 200 milligrams or more for your most dire energy emergencies, maybe the very first day of your string of night shifts where you really need a lot of help. Otherwise, there are some other caffeinated beverages with less caffeine in them. For example, Red Bull, even though it's a stereotypical energy drink that's got a lot of negative press and a lot of negative associations, it's actually weak sauce when it comes to caffeine. It has only 80 milligrams, which is less than a standard cup of coffee. So you can find a sugar free Red Bull or something like V8 Energy, which is a lot more natural
Oh,
than Red Bull. Both of
yeah.
those have only 80 milligrams of caffeine. So you can find those beverages that have less than that 200 milligrams and save the stronger ones for when you really need that full 200 milligram dose.
Oh, that's good to know. Now, I know our listeners are also thinking when they're thinking about and viewers are thinking about energy drinks. Yeah, but it's not just the caffeine in there, so we got to get all that other ingredients in there. Can you clarify that a little bit for us? Is there as much alerting properties from all of the other stuff they put in energy drinks compared to caffeine? Where's the dispel that myth for us?
Yes. So this is a tricky question. In fact, I spent about 10 years of my life working on a book, which I'll hold up here. And for those that are listening, the name of the book is Are You a Monster or a Rock Star? A Guide to Energy Drinks. And in this book and in my 10 years of research, I tried to answer that question. What are these other ingredients doing? Do they actually work? Do they give us energy or other health benefits? Or are they just window dressing? Are they just there to make the product look appealing but not actually doing anything? And honestly, most of the ingredients are the latter. They're just there to look nice. Caffeine is caffeine. So whether you're getting it from a coffee or a tea or a Red Bull or a healthy energy drink, caffeine is the one doing all of the work. B vitamins only really give you energy. And I'm not talking about caloric energy, I'm talking about perceived alertness. B vitamins really only give you that perceived alertness if you're deficient in them. So, heaven forbid you're using an energy drink to get all your vitamins in a day. Please don't do that.
Yeah,
Please have a multivitamin and not a Red Bull. But really, caffeine is the only one giving you that energy. And other ingredients like taurine, carnitine, glucuronolactone, they're not interacting with caffeine and they barely have a physiological effect at all. The one exception to that is ingredients like guarana, yerba mate, and guayusa, because those are sources of caffeine. So I am grouping them together with regular caffeine, just synthetic caffeine, when I talk about caffeine giving you energy. And that is one of the reasons why energy drinks, when they first came out, seemed so much stronger than a regular cup of coffee because you had the caffeine by itself as well as all these other additional sources of caffeine. However, nowadays, energy drinks have to put the amount of caffeine from all sources on the
oh,
label. So if you're looking for something with 200 milligrams of caffeine or less, if it's an energy drink, it will say on the label how much total caffeine is in there. Not all coffees do that, however. So that's one of the pros of getting an energy drink versus a coffee. Energy drinks are a little more forthcoming with their content.
And that's what I talk about too. Is I'm not saying we should all just start drinking energy drinks all the time, but I like the energy drink idea because you know exactly how much caffeine you're getting out of it. And in your 5 S's, tell me if one of them matches my idea of knowing your dose and calibrating it and using it properly. So knowing just how much caffeine your brain needs to get the specific effect out of it. Does that fit in with any of your 5 S's?
I believe so. Let me see. I've got zip, skip, stop, switch, sleep. Yes. So essentially, that matches most closely with the sip, which is you shouldn't finish your whole caffeinated beverage because it might just be a few sips that you need. So really you get to be your own scientist and you get to determine, I don't actually need this whole beverage. And some of those energy drinks actually have lids where you can reseal them. For example, by Antioxidant Infusion and Neuro from Sonic from Neuro, they have lids. So those are the best types of energy drinks where you can figure out which dose you need by sipping it slowly and not consuming the whole thing.
That's really 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 good to know because you see so many people with the huge ones, and they
Yes.
feel they have to drink it the whole thing to get that desired effect out of it. Yeah, but if you titrate it, use it properly, like you said, I think is a good approach. So, what would you think of using the sip approach during a night shift?
Well, there's actually a beautiful little curve that I like called the Yerkes-Dodson law, which says that your performance improves with increasing stimulation. So the more stimulated you are, whether it's from caffeine or someone yelling at you, the more stimulated you are, the better you perform to a point. After that point, after that magical peak, your performance actually goes down. So for someone on the night shift, it's really important to sip that caffeine throughout your shift because you don't know exactly when you're going to hit that peak, and more caffeine will actually make you feel and perform worse. Something that I used to do when I worked at a bar, I would crack open my energy drink like as I'm logging in, as I'm typing into the computer, right, to sign in. Then I would put it in my locker. And then I would have a few more sips during my lunch break at 1 a.m. And then I would have a few more sips right before I started driving home. So I made one can of energy drink last my whole shift. And sometimes, if I was lucky, if it was the third night shift in a row, my body would be a little more used to it compared to that first night. So I'd be able to put the rest of the can in the refrigerator and then use it the following night for that fourth night shift. So you can really stretch out your caffeine by moderating it like that.
Did you ever run into troubles with getting sleep after your night shift, or maybe you were just so busy back then you didn't have time to sleep after your night shift anyway?
Well, it's a delicate balance because sometimes, and in fact, some research that I've looked at with nurses found that your driving is safer if you have a little bit of caffeine before you drive home, but that's 100 milligrams or less. That's 1 cup of coffee. You want to keep it low enough where you're alert enough to drive home safely, but not so energized that it's going to sabotage your sleep when you do get home. So you really do have to sip and figure out exactly how much caffeine you need so that you are driving safe, but then you can get that quality of sleep that you mentioned before.
Yeah, and I think without a bit of practice, understanding the dose you need, it can be a risk if you're trying to get some sleep when you get home. Perhaps your whole day is messed up. Then you don't get enough sleep or good quality sleep the whole day, and then you've got to go back to work. One of the strategies I get my clients to think about is, can you provide a nap room so people can get some sleep after the night shift before they drive home, right? So then
Yes.
they don't necessarily need the caffeine. They need to get some sleep be alert enough to drive home, and then still get some sleep when they get home.
And that actually ties into two of the other five S's. We've talked about sip, we've talked about switch, but the other two that relate to your tip is to stop and sleep. So if you have caffeine too close to your bedtime, remember it takes 5 to 7 hours for half of your caffeine to leave your system. So what that means is if you have caffeine within 5 to 7 hours of bedtime, it's going to interfere with your sleep. So one of my 5 S's is to stop. Know when you need to stop having caffeine, whether it's setting an alarm and saying, that's it, no more caffeine past this hour. I don't care how tired I am. I don't care how I feel. If I have caffeine past this hour, it's going to sabotage my sleep. And it's going to put me in that cycle where you get poor sleep and you wake up tired and you need caffeine. So you have caffeine and then you get poor sleep and you wake up tired. And it's just an awful cycle. So you have to know when to stop drinking caffeine. And then the other S I mentioned, sleep. There's something called sleep inertia, which I know you've talked about before, which is when you take a nap, sometimes you wake up and you're a bit groggy. It takes your brain a while to wake up from that nap. It's like inertia, where an object in motion wants to stay in motion. Your body is asleep and it wants to stay asleep. So one way to counteract that is to have a little bit of caffeine right before a 20-minute nap. And that is the best thing that you can do with that nap room that you mentioned. If people have a little bit of caffeine, few sips, and then they take advantage of that nap room, they'll wake up from their nap and not have as much sleep inertia because they've had both the nap and the caffeine, and they'll be a little bit more alert on their drive home.
Yeah, I really like that. When I'm talking about that strategy, I call it the Nappuccino.
I like it. Nappuccino. Perfect.
Yeah. So the sleep inertia, I think you hit on a really important point there, because sleep inertia is or can be really dangerous. It takes you, as you said, it takes your brain time to wake up from sleep. You can't just reverse, which is essentially a very different state of consciousness in seconds. So people who are napping, say, in their cars, and then turn on the ignition and drive home, that's really, really dangerous. When I'm working with pilots, train operators, mariners, people in safety critical positions, and I'm teaching them how to nap, what we call it is controlled rest. Controlled because the process is tightly controlled. Everybody has to be taught how to do it well and safely. And they need to know how to control sleep inertia afterwards. One of the ways is to do the nappuccino, like you said, some caffeine just before the nap. You get your sleep, so now you've got the benefit of sleep plus caffeine on the other side of it. But if you don't have caffeine, or maybe even to amplify the effect or speed up the dissipation of sleep inertia, if you engage your mind and your body for 15 to 20 minutes after that nap, you should be good to go. So when I'm teaching the process or the controlled rest concept, what I say is after that nap, do something not non-safety critical, right? So engage your brain and body in doing some sort of puzzles or talking casually with somebody or trying to tell jokes. And then engage your, did I say mind or body there?
I thought you said both.
Did I? Okay. So engage your mind through something non-critical, non-safety critical like that. But also to engage your body. So physical movement. You don't have to do a workout, but just get up, walk around, maybe circle your arms around, maybe a couple of light jumping jacks. You do that for about 20 minutes, and sleep inertia should be at a low enough level, if not gone, to allow you to perform safely again. So when you're doing controlled rest during duty, that's where I also introduce the concept of taking a nappuccino too. So let's flip it around a little bit. So your idea of the nappuccino was when we're discussing driving home. If people are napping during duty, so they've got a break, or they've got a controlled rest policy that allows them to essentially be paid to sleep on duty, You pause your safety critical work and you nap. My recommendation is to nap as long as you possibly can. Now that doesn't often fit uh, within an organization's operations, where you can't just allow people to go to work and then sleep for the whole shift. So then people start asking, well, how long should I sleep? And to reduce sleep inertia, the best bet is to sleep less than 20 minutes or more than 80 minutes. So 20 minutes, you get a bit of stage one, stage two, which are easier to wake up from.
Okay.
Or if you go the other side, you go through one whole sleep cycle and you get some stage one, two, stage three, deep sleep, some REM sleep in there as well, and you wake up again from the light sleep. And this can take about an 80 minutes, hour and a half, something of that duration. So if you wanted to do controlled rest and say take a longer nap, you've got the ability, maybe your organization allows it, or you've got some uh, break built into your duty period that allows you to sort of check out for an hour and a half. What dosage would you recommend to do the Nappuccino strategy? So dosage just before that controlled rest, so that it doesn't, uh, it still has an effect on the other side of sleep, but it's not so much that you wake up from your nap because of the caffeine. What would you recommend there?
So I would recommend probably 100 milligrams. I think you could have 100 to 200 milligrams in that case right before the nap. And in fact, some of the research I looked at with truck drivers, with sleep deprived truck drivers, they used doses closer to 200 milligrams. My only concern there is if you are working a night shift and if you are one of these people that has a 12-hour shift, I think having the higher end of that 100 to 200 range means you're more likely to have a lot of caffeine in a 24-hour period. So, for example, if you are a nurse and you do have the luxury of an 80-minute nap built into your 12-hour shift, if you have 100 milligrams, that means you have another 300 in your allowance for that 24-hour period. So you'll still get the benefit of the Nappuccino with the 100 milligrams, but you'll also have the other 75% of your daily dose to figure out how you want to get through the rest of your shift and through your journey home. So
And I
100
think
milligrams is my magic dose.
so 100 milligrams. So another challenge I see with trying to consume 200 milligrams before your nap to do the Nappuccino approach is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the ones with 200 or more than the 100 milligram dose usually have a bit more volume. So it takes you
Yeah.
longer to drink it, which then means if you're taking longer to drink it, you've got more and more caffeine taking effect before your nap, which then can have perhaps an effect on your sleep during your nap too. So I think the 100 milligrams is probably, like you said, a really good recommendation.
Exactly. Yes.
Good. So we
That's
are
that's a
at
good point. I didn't think about the volume, but that's, like we talked about the nature of sipping energy drinks. That's one of the benefits of coffees or energy drinks versus shots. You want to sip, so maybe something smaller like a little caffeine pouch or an energy shot, not 5 hour because that has 200 milligrams, but having a shot or having Elite Ops energy strips is a dissolvable strip in your tongue that has 100 milligrams. That provides that 100 milligrams in the smallest volume possible so that you can have it and then get right to napping.
good. So you get it in quickly, you get some sleep, and you're good to go after that controlled rest.
Yes.
Nice. So we've talked about prevention. I talked a bit about trying to maximize the quality and the quantity of your sleep, optimizing both. We talked about having a bit of caffeine before the night shift. And then we talked about our fatigue countermeasures of trying to get some sleep during the night shift, maybe some caffeine during the night shift, or combine them into our Nappuccino here. We're at our hour mark. Is there anything else you wanted to add in there? Anything we didn't touch on that you wanted to share with our audience?
Just one more thing, and that is the last S that I may not have mentioned, which is skip. So knowing when to skip caffeine entirely. On my podcast, Caffeine at Midnight, I talked about using the acronym HALT, HALT. And those are the 4 situations when you don't want any caffeine. HALT stands for hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. So in this case, I don't mean tired, I mean like zombie level exhausted. So if you're any of those 4, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, you'll want to skip caffeine entirely because it's going to backfire. It's going to make you feel worse, whether because you're hungry and caffeine will aggravate your empty stomach. You're angry and caffeine is just going to make you more anxious and angsty. You're lonely, caffeine triggers dopamine, but it's not going to make you feel, less depressed. It's not a cure for depression or sadness. And tired, if you're zombie level exhausted, caffeine is going to interrupt with your sleep, which you need more than that. So in my latest book, which is How to Get Done When You Feel Like I talk about switching up your caffeine and also all the other things, some of which you already mentioned, that you can do instead of caffeine, like having a nappuccino or going for a walk, talking to someone. So there are some things that you can do to feel more alert while you're skipping the caffeine, whether it's drinking water or just being less bored, like switching up your task. So that's the last thing I wanted to mention. I think it's as important knowing when not to have any caffeine as it is knowing how much caffeine to have when you do have it.
Yeah, it's not always the right solution, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So can you just review because we talked about the 5 S's throughout our conversation? Can you just review those for our audience?
Absolutely. So the 5 S's of caffeine are sip, skip, stop, switch, and sleep.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'll just summarize mine, my tips or pointers. In sleep is always a great solution. Try and focus on optimizing the quality and the quantity of your sleep. But also keep in mind that you're probably going to have to make some difficult decisions that help you prioritize your sleep. We didn't get into discussing all of the negative long-term health consequences of being sleep deprived over years and years, but there are lots. And it can end up shortening your life. So oftentimes you got to think about the trade-off between getting sleep now versus skipping sleep and living a more healthy or unhealthy life, or longer life versus shorter life. So prioritizing sleep is really important, and that will help you get the right quality and quantity of sleep that you have. So can you just hold up, I think on one of your books, you've got your website listed, right?
Yes, somewhere. I believe on the back of this book. Nope, it's not here. But this is my most recent book, and it's been a bestseller, which I'm so happy about. I actually wrote this book while I was pregnant, so this was kind of my last hurrah before baby number 2 came along. And this book is available on Amazon. You can also find a lot more about me, what I do, the people that I work with on a regular basis, and a bunch of different energy drinks at greeneyedguide.com. That's my website.
Perfect, thanks. And of course, everybody can see my website up there, sleepanddreams.com. I put out a fatigue facts newsletter every month where I usually take a piece of published research on fatigue and sleep and try to figure out, is there a way we can use this practically in the fatigue management in the shift working world? So it's science-based solutions for your sleep and fatigue. And if people want to sign up for that newsletter, head on over to sleepanddreams.com and they can sign up right there. So my name again, Clint Marquardt, sleep and fatigue specialist, and I've been chatting today with my good friend and colleague,
Danielle Robertson Rath, also known as Green Eyed Guide.
Excellent. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and hopefully we'll talk to everybody again soon.